Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. Hello, Yanan. Sorry, we're just waiting to see if there's any more people attending. There's some more people in the waiting room. Here they are. Jaslene is here. Okay, just before we begin this session, thank you all for coming. Can I make a request, please? If it's possible to have your camera on, that would be helpful, just simply because it's better to talk to faces. Doesn't matter if your hair is a bit wild. I can see, we've all got wild hair out here, it's no problem. It's just better to talk to faces rather than to lots of blank screens, because you get to sense the emotion of how people are feeling. And Joy-T, got to see. Hello, Joy-T, nice to see you. I know you, Joy-T, I've seen you online a lot. So what we're going to do, hello, what we're going to do, just to give you an overview of the session today. Obviously, the session we're going to run is about cultivating leadership in your schools and developing the leaders of tomorrow using 21st century skills. We're going to run through, obviously, two presentations. During those presentations, what we will do is I'll have some things for you to take away with you. So, I'm going to ask you to, at some point, to hold your phone up to the screen, and you will scan a QR code, and then you will download a resource that you can take away into your schools with you tomorrow or whenever you go back to school. And we're also going to have a couple of breakout sessions where I'm going to ask you to do an activity, which is going to be quite fun. And also you'll get to know each other a little bit more. And also the reason we're doing those is so that you can actually do those sessions in your classroom with your students. So just before I start, can you just tell me, by putting your hand up, if you're a primary school, if you're working in primary school, just pop your hand up if you're primary. So kindergarten to year 6. What if you're high school? If you're going from year 6 to year 12, pop your hand up. And if you're preschool, have we got any preschool people here who are in the before school session? So under 6-year-olds. Okay, all right. Fantastic. Okay, so obviously the session we're going to talk about today is about choice and motivation and the secret to an amazing education, developing the leaders of tomorrow. Now, just to give you a bit of a background very quickly, my name is Gavin McCormack. I'm the school principal over at Farmhouse Montessori School in Manly here in Australia. I've actually just recently resigned from my position as the school principal. Next year, I'll be actually working as a consultant for my own company. I've opened my own educational company, and we have about 20 schools so far in Australia who are working with us. And I'm actually working on something very similar to what I'll be talking about today with you. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this year plays out, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the world. And so I feel that this is what we can do together. Now, I'm situated over here in Australia. In Australia, we have our own curriculum. It's very much based on the English curriculum, which I know a lot of Indian schools follow and Middle Eastern schools follow at the moment, with the IB as a heavily influenced in that. I'm actually a Montessori trained teacher myself as well. So I have the mainstream side of things, along with the Montessori side of things, and also I'm early years trained, so I can bring in the 3 to 6. Okay, so let's get started. So basically, as a Montessori teacher, I wanted to start with this diagram. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, what is that thing? That is pretty intense, this huge picture of a very strange being. Now, what you're looking at here is something called homunculus. Now, this is based on some research out of the US, and this is representing a child. You might think, what a strange looking child. Actually, each of the body parts of the child have been enlarged or shrunk to tell you how much sensory input they have into the child. And what it tells you is this, that the child's hands are the biggest port of information from 0 to 6 years old. And when you have a look at that, you understand that your children need to touch. They need to touch things. If you are in your classroom and you're asking your children, don't touch, keep your hands to yourself, don't touch, you're obviously going to be failing them at that point because they need to touch things. Secondly, look at the size of the mouth, which tells you your children need to talk. If you have a classroom which is silent, you're failing the children. So if there's no touching and there's no talking, immediately you've lost all of that sensory input, which is how they're going to essentially learn. The tongue is huge too, because taste is a huge factor, and obviously the eyes are slightly big. Generally, what we do in schools is we get our children to sit down quietly with their hands to themselves, and the teacher talks for 7 hours. Actually, we need to move away from that, because what we are seeing, the research is showing us that if our children can talk and if they can touch, the learning will be enriched a great deal all the way up to 16 years of age. And this is why this diagram is extremely important. Now, it's followed by this wonderful graph. Now, this is a graph of obviously development of early year experiences when it comes to cognitive functions, such as language. What you can see in this graph, if you follow the blue line, which is language, is after we hit 1 year of age, we start to actually decline in the way that we learn. So the early years, the foundations of our education is extremely important. Sensory pathways, so vision and hearing. But look at the purple line, the pink line, which is higher cognitive functions. You can see at 6 years of age, we start to have a decline, which means it starts to become more difficult for our students to understand difficult concepts. This is only the case when we stop talking, we stop touching, we stop tasting, we stop moving, and we stop feeling. So if you can keep this in mind when you are planning your lessons, this is really important, because when you're planning a lesson, are my children allowed to touch things? Are they allowed to talk? Are they allowed to taste, move, and see? If all of those things are included in your lesson delivery, the amount of learning that you will have will be increased by tenfold. And you can see that by the time you get to 16 years of age, you're almost down to 0. So you only have this small window of time. And for anybody who's working in early years, you can see that 0 to 6 years of age is extremely important with higher cognitive functions. These are things like mathematics, English, reading, sensory processing, emotional intelligence, EQ. All of these things happen between 0 to 6 years of age. So when you're allowing students to come into your school as an enrollment, they're the key important questions to ask. Now, Time magazine stated that they wanted to include how to build the student for the 21st century. Okay, and in a world of unambiguous and rapidly changing information, less and less confined to discrete subjects, schools will need to help the children do these things. These are the most important things. So think laterally or creatively. Does your lesson, does your program allow your students to be creative? Or are you, as a teacher, just saying to them, I know everything you need to know. If you listen to me, you will be smart. Well, actually, that's not the truth. What you're saying to your students is, hello, everybody, today you can only be as smart as me. And that shouldn't be the case, because your students have the potential to be smarter than you. Number 2 is become aware of global citizens. So do they understand their place in the world? Do they understand that, yes, they might be in Mumbai or Hyderabad or Bangalore, but have you established connections where they can reach out to other parts of the world and they understand what's happening around the globe? Number 3, developing good people skills. And this is where, we'll talk about this later, but this is where the setup of your classroom and the setup of your lesson is very important. And I can't stress this to you enough. If you are planning a program of work or a sequence of work over a period of time, it must be included that the students get to enhance their skills. And I'm going to give you something later so you can work on that in your schools, but skills such as creativity, understanding, compassion, empathy, resilience, determination. If your students are sitting in silence and you are doing all of the talking, those skills will be hampered a great deal. Now, this is no criticism to anybody in this session, but I've worked in schools all around the world. And when the principal takes me to the classroom to show me how wonderful it is, we walk in and everybody is silent. And the principal says, what do you think? And I always say, why isn't anybody talking? And he said, well, they're all listening very carefully. But the reality is, when you're interacting with each other, there's a great deal of learning. And the last part is to learn to manage new sources of information. And this is crucial. Not all schools have the luxury of this, but are there lots and lots of areas in which the children can go and gather information? So a library, the internet, their peers, can they use the telephone? This is a very good question to ask. You know, if a student came to you in the office and said, excuse me, Mrs. Tanzin, could I use your telephone, please? I need to call a local business to ask them if they want to sponsor our newspaper. You know, is the answer yes or is it no? If the answer is no, you need to think about that. Children can use the telephone. And if you want them to develop these skills for real life, the answer should be yes. Or you have to find a way where it can be yes. Now, a lot of schools around the world are talking about project-based learning, you know? They're talking about this kind of learning. They have it on their websites, they promote it in their handouts, but do they actually know what project-based learning is? And I want to give you a real tangible example today. These two students here are students from my class. These are 10-year-old students. Actually, I met one of them just the other day. I bumped into him in the supermarket. He's now 16. Anyway, in this particular class, project-based learning, I said to the students, today we're going to be learning about the human heart. Now, that's in every curriculum in the world. You learn about biology and you learn about the heart. What I said to the students is this. I said, we're going to learn about the human heart, but at the end of this session, you can choose any way you want to show me your research. These two boys, they said, Gavin, we want to be doctors when we're older. So at the end, is it possible we can actually dissect a heart? So I said, of course you can. We can't do a human heart. That's too controversial, but I can get you a lamb's heart. So they went away and they did a project, a very big and in detail project. And I told them, I didn't give them a grade. I didn't give them a score. I didn't give them a percentage, but I told them, when you are an expert on the human heart, when you prove to me you know everything about the human heart, I will give you 2 hearts. They were so excited to get these hearts. I bought them from the butcher's shop for $1, no problem. They did this amazing project on the heart, and I gave them 2 hearts, and they dissected them, and they inspected them, and they found the aorta and the pulmonary valve. They found all the things that were in the human heart, but they could smell it, they could taste it, they could feel it, they could touch it. And remember what I showed you earlier on with homunculus? If you think about that diagram, look at these boys. Look how in detail they are in terms of their inspection, because they're using their hands, they're using their eyes, they can smell it, they can almost taste it. Now, the rest of the class was really interested at this point. But when it comes to project-based learning, this is what project-based learning looks like. It's not about making a project on a piece of card that you stick on the wall. This is about making the link between the curriculum and the real world. This is very, very important. And any way that you can do that is really important. Now, a few pointers here to point out to everyone is this. It's the kind of education where observation is key, where you have a chance, Mubin, where you have a chance to watch the kids. You see, when these 2 boys were doing this dissection, I got a chance to observe them very carefully. I watched them. They were so ingrained in their work and interested. I could observe them. I saw leadership. I saw, compassion, compromise, negotiation, communication. I saw all of these skills that no exam could ever show me. The student were at the center of their learning. So I asked them, how would you like to show me your learning? And they chose dissecting a heart. I said, it doesn't matter if you cut the heart by accident. It's not alive. It's not a human heart. You're not working in a hospital. So our mistakes were encouraged. Now, they're not competing with each other. They're working on their own. They're working on their own focusing. This is about equality. And the students have a clear voice and direction. And I gave them freedom, absolute freedom, but I gave them limits. I said, you can dissect that heart, but at the end, I need to know what you've done and everything needs to be cleaned away. So it's good to give freedom. Freedom within limits is always a good option. Okay, let's continue. And this is from Maria Montessori gave me this quote. At some given moment, it happens that a child becomes deeply interested in a piece of work. We see it in the expression on his face or her face. Sorry, Montessori was very old school. His intense concentration and the devotion to the exercise. Now, as a teacher, this is what you're looking for. When your students are highly engaged in their work, when you see them and they're in it, they're thick of it, the worst thing we can do as teachers is to say, okay, stop now. It's now time for mathematics. Because you know what it's like. We've all had work to do before for our school leaders, our principal, or whoever it is, and you have to finish a report, or you have to finish something, and you're in it, and if someone disturbs you, someone breaks your concentration, there's nothing worse than that. And when we do that to our students, there's nothing worse than that either for them. They obviously want to be focused, and you can see it on their face. Now, what happens when our students are focused? What happens when they have a desire to learn? Well, this will ring very true to what's happening right now around the world. In the autumn of 1937, a rapidly spreading virus with no known cure, polio, made it too dangerous for children to attend school. Now, we know what that's like. We're actually living in that right now. It's too dangerous to go to school. But look at these children in Morocco, in Botswana, in Madagascar. They're learning over the radio. Now, we found it hard to teach via Zoom. we've got a camera, we've got all our technology. But in 1937, 15 of the greatest teachers in the UK were called into the BBC studios, and they taught for 4 years over the radio. Now, what was the key component? They had to have interesting content, and they had to give freedom to the students. So the idea was they inspired the students with a wonderful story, and then they asked them to go away and continue their research. And that's really important, because that's what we need to do in our classrooms now. Rather than saying to the students, hello, everybody, I'm the teacher. I know everything in the whole world. I am basically Google. I know everything. So you need to listen to me. And if you listen to me, then you'll know everything too. But actually, that's not the truth. You don't know everything. You might think you do, but you don't know everything. You know some stuff. You don't know everything. I'm a teacher too, 25 years. I don't know everything either. But what you do know is some really inspirational stuff. So you say to the children, we're going to learn about volcanoes today, everybody. Now, I'm just going to tell you something really interesting about volcanoes. And the kids are like, wow, I didn't know that. You say, did you know that the largest volcano ever to erupt on Earth was in Indonesia? Okay, and you tell them all of this information, and they are very, very interested. And then you say to them, what would you like to know about volcanoes? And the students put their hands up. And one child says, I'd like to know, how hot is lava? So that is a wonderful question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to write it down. And you write it down. Another child puts his hand up and says, what would happen if a super volcano erupted? You say, that is an amazing question. And you write it down. Another child puts his hand up and says, are there volcanoes on Mars? And you say, that's even better. And you write these questions down. And then you say to the students, now I would like you to go away, and I want you to find the answers to these questions. You can use the library. You can use an iPad. You can use the internet. You can use your friends. You can ask your grandfather. I do not mind. You can work with your friends, you can work on your own, you can work in a pair, you can stand up, you can work on the floor. It doesn't matter to me. But at the end of the session, you're going to come back and you're going to tell us what you know about volcanoes, and you're going to teach us all. And just watch. The students go, oh my God, suddenly they're all burst into life. I'll work with you. Let's sit over here. You grab the pens, I'll grab the iPad. This amazing cacophony of excitement appears in your classroom. And it's all about inspiring them and then letting them go. Because then you have the opportunity to watch and see the skills happening in front of you. And we're going to do some of this later on. We're going to have a breakout group and we're going to try this. But if you can teach 60 million children over the radio for 5 years, we can definitely do this in our classrooms when they're sitting in front of us. And this has proved it. Now, what's the biggest thing we can do as a teacher? Well, we need to find every child's hook. Now, this isn't possible, as you know, because we're all under pressure. We've got programs to write, we've got reports to finish, we've got our household we've got the kids are getting picked up from school, I've got to clean the toilet, there's so many things we can do. I don't have time to find every child's hook. And what does this mean? It actually means spend time with each and every child in your class, just enough to know what their passions are. Because when you know what each child's passion is, whenever they become disengaged, you can redirect them to their passion. And you might think, why do I have this huge, why do I have this huge aeroplane on this picture? Well, I'll tell you why. I was taking a group of students about 6 months ago on a bushwalk, and we were walking through the forest. And in the distance, I saw an aeroplane. I saw this aeroplane, actually, not this exact one, but I saw it in the distance. And I stopped the entire class. And I said, everybody stop. Look in the distance over there. There's a Hercules. It's a famous bomber from the UK. And a boy put his hand up, and he's only 6. He said, Gavin, that's not a Hercules. That's a C-19 Globemaster III. You can tell from the shape of the engines. And I was corrected. And what I learned in that moment is that he is a specialist when it comes to World War II aircraft. And so when I know that about each of my students, whenever they become disengaged, I can redirect them to something that interests them. They also believe they're coming to school every day to follow their passion. And that is the most important part. You're all teachers because you love teaching. You found your passion, and therefore you love coming to work like me. But imagine a child coming to school where they feel that they haven't got a voice, you don't understand them, and they can't follow their passion. The 2 boys who are going to be doctors, they know that I know they want to be a doctor. Whenever I can, in mathematics, history, science, geography, English, I direct the lesson towards being a doctor. With this little boy, whenever I can, with English, mathematics, science, art, whatever it is, I try to direct the curriculum towards World War II history. And when you know your students like that, When you know their hook, you have no problem. That's when life becomes easy, because they feel that they're coming to school to follow their passion. You know, we often say to our students, what do you want to be when you're older? And they say, I don't know. The reason they say, I don't know, is because we haven't learned who they are. When we know who they are, they find it very, very quickly. Let's continue. So, this is a picture of a Montessori classroom on the left-hand side. And the children in there are 3 to 6 years old. In fact, that's my school over here in Australia. On the right-hand side is the head office of Airbnb in San Francisco. Now, well, you might be thinking, why have I got these two pictures next to each other? I tell you why. In the Montessori classroom on the left-hand side, I can't see the teacher. Can you? I can't see them. Some people might think, there's no teacher. This is criminal. Where is the teacher? Is she slacking off and going to the staff room drinking coffee? Well, she's not. She's probably working with one child behind a bookcase somewhere. But because the students have freedom and they have trust, and the classroom is set up in a way that everything is available and it's all yes, they're working, they're engaged, they're allowed to move, they're allowed to talk, they're allowed to work at their own pace. And what do you get? Real creativity. On the right-hand side, this is the head office of Airbnb. This is one of the most profitable, most creative, innovative companies on the planet. People are sitting where they want. People are working on their own. They're standing up, working on the floor. When we give this freedom and trust, we get absolute creativity. And just a quick bit of information for you, an interesting fact. The people who invented Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, Elon Musk, Taylor Swift, they all went to Montessori school. And when Montessori school, you get freedom and you get trust. If we give our students freedom and trust, we get absolute creativity. And it's not too hard, but it involves us as the teacher letting go. Quite often as teachers, we feel that if I have control over everything, I'm a good teacher. If everyone's sitting down and nobody's talking, I'm doing a great job. Actually, you're not doing a great job. You're not doing a great job to them or to you, because when you're talking for 7 hours a day, unfortunately, what happens is the children don't have any time to be independent. And that's what we actually want to get from our students, independence, because they're established trust. Now, when you do this, when you make this change, what happens is we develop a wonderful series of skills. And I'll give you a list now. There's more than these, and we'll come to them a bit later on. But the first list is about learning and innovative skills. So critical thinking, interdisciplinary thinking, initiative and leadership, left brain detail, right brain creative thinking. We've got life and career skills, so adaptability, initiative, self-direction, time management, flexibility, humility, risk-taking. And we get in the top right corner, we get grace and courtesy, which means caring for each other and caring for yourself. We get negotiation, which is working in teams, and we get conflict resolution. Now, I've done this before myself, so I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure you are too. Two children are talking. They're sitting together in the class, and they are talking. You are trying to teach, and they are talking. And you say to them, you two boys are talking too much. Move. One of you go over there, and one go over there. And we think we're doing a wonderful thing. But actually, what we should do is say, you two are talking, stay together. Because what will happen is this. They won't learn anything because they're talking. And at the end of the session, one boy will say to the other boy, oh, you know what? I didn't learn anything today because you were talking all the time. I'm not sitting with you next time. And the other boy says, but I'm your best friend. He said, no, but you talk too much. So I'm not sitting with you. And then the boy says, well, okay, what if I don't talk next time? Okay, I'll give you a chance. Next time they come together and they sit together and the other boy says, I'm not going to talk this time. Okay, that's good. And, you know, this is real life. Like if you are in school and, you know, if Ira is working with VJ and the principal says, I need you to write a program for me, and you don't do it. You like, don't write the program. The principal will say, can I have the program, please? And you say, well, I haven't done it, actually. Me and VJ were just in the cafe all day drinking coffee. We never did it. You'll say, I don't think we should do that together next time because we're in trouble with the boss. You know, that's real life. So we need to give our students a chance to have real life. The principal is not going to say to, you know, VJ and Ira, you two, you're having too many coffees, move away from each other. That's not real life. And so we need to set up our classrooms so it is real life. It takes time. It's not a quick fix, but it works. You just need to give it a bit of time. Now, Montessori, who I did my training with, was a change maker. And she was a change maker for one reason only. She put the child in the center of their learning. She decided, I want the children to be at the center of this. This isn't about the teacher, this is about the child. And so she knew the children, she observed them, and she attempted to build the curriculum around them. And in 1931, she was actually featured in Time magazine for exactly that. Now, this next part is probably, I'd say, the most important part of this 2-hour presentation. You and I, and all the teachers here, know that there are different types of learning. Kinesthetic, auditory, visual, different types of learning. We all know that. And we've all done that research before. You know, we've all seen this before. What we don't know, and what is not common knowledge, is that within your learning space, within your classroom, you've actually got different types of learners. Now, I'm just making an estimation here because I've worked in schools for 25 years all over the world, but many schools around the world have the students sitting in rows, in pairs. I don't know if that's you, and it's fine if it is, not a problem. I've done it too. For 15 years, I had exactly that in my classroom. So the children sit in rows, in pairs, and you say, these children can sit together because they work well together. So we put them in their seats, like we don't let them choose. And when we do that, we think we're doing a wonderful job, but actually we're not allowing them to find their own way. Now, this part's the most important bit, and I'll share these slides with you if you want to share them later on with your teaching teams in your schools. But there's actually 4 types of learners that we need to know, and all of you will fall into these categories too as adults, just like me. So there are 4 types of learners. And sorry, by the way, Yinan, there's some people in the waiting room. I don't know if you're letting them in. Okay, thank you. There's 4 types of learners, okay, and this is crucial. The first type of learner is called the isolated learner. Now, these kids, these children, they like to work on their own. They don't want to talk. They don't want to integrate. They don't want to be bothered. They're not bothered. They want to come to school, do their work, and leave, right? And there are teachers exactly the same. Everyone goes to the staff room, and some people are in there talking, and well, the weekend was such a wonderful weekend. Some teachers don't go to the staff room. They're not interested. They come to school, they teach, they're a good teacher, and they leave and go home. You have students like that too. They want to come into your classroom. They don't want to sit with somebody else. They want to sit on their own. They don't want lots of sensory processing to deal with. They don't want to face into the classroom. They want to face the wall, because too much sensory overload for these children and they'll get nothing done. They just sit there observing everything. Wow, oh my God, look what he's doing. And they get nothing done. We fail them when we don't understand who they are. So isolated learners, I'll tell you how to work these out later, who's what. But they want to work on their own, but they'll work really, really hard if you put them in the right spot. Number 1, probably some of you are isolated learners, isolated teachers. You want to work on your own. You're not bothered about all the gossip. The second part is a parallel learner. Now, your parallel learner is very interesting. They want to work together. They're best friends, these children. They are BFFs, or whatever you call them. They're best buddies, right? They work together. They might not be the same age. They might not even be on the same subject. They may not be even working on the same topic at the same time. But just because they're next to each other, they give each other the confidence to be able to succeed. They don't feel on their own. They often check in with each other, these children. They'll say, hey, do you like my picture? Oh, I love your picture. They say, how do you spell the word sausages? Let me tell you how to spell that. They are best friends, confidants. If you allow them to be together, then they will thrive. If you don't, they won't. Number 3 is your cooperative learner. These are students who work at the same time on the same thing, and they can't do it unless they have each other. These 2 students, this is a picture from my school. I did a lesson on polygons, which is 2-dimensional shapes. And I said, you can go away now and represent your research in any way that you need. These 2 boys are very, very low in confidence. They're high anxiety, but you let them sit together. Look at these 2 boys, same color, same everything. Because if one of them gets it wrong, that's okay, because they both got it wrong. And there's no problem if we both get it wrong. Well, that's fine. I'm not going to be vindicated, and I'm not going to feel so stupid, because there's 2 of us. These are cooperative learners. Allow them to be together, and they work very, very hard. And your 4th one, the final one, is your collaborative learner. And this is where a group of students work together as a team on a very big project, often working on the floor. They'll work together. And in this team, you will see the people who are lost and the leaders. So people who don't know what to do, they will go to this group, and this group will have a natural leader. He will say, okay, let's build a model of this snake. You get the paper, you get the card, you get the scissors, I'll get the books, we'll meet back here in 2 minutes. This is where you'll see leadership and mentorship happen. Now you might be thinking, how am I supposed to do this? Like, how am I supposed to know where my children sit? Are they isolated, parallel, cooperative, or collaborative? How do I know? Here's how you know. And I would encourage you the next time you go to school to do this. Go to your lesson 20 minutes early. Move some tables against the wall. Make an isolated space. Make 2 or 3 spaces for children to sit on their own. Put some tables in pairs, put some in groups, and put some rugs on the floor. Then teach your lesson. You say, today we're going to learn about dinosaurs. Did you know the Brachiosaurus was one of the largest dinosaurs in the world? It had 2 brains, one in its head and one in its tail. And you inspire them. They're like, wow, I didn't know that. And you say, what would you like to know about dinosaurs? They say, I'd like to know. And they ask the questions, you write them down, you say, off you go. We're going to meet in 45 minutes. And we're going to understand what you've learned about dinosaurs. But here's the important bit. You then say, you can sit wherever you like, and you can work with whom you choose. And then you, as the teacher, you watch and you see who sat on their own, who sat in a pair, who went to a group, and you make a note. Thomas, he's an isolated learner. I need to make sure there's always a space for him. Look at him sitting against the wall and working on his own. I'm never going to make him sit in a pair ever again. Those 2 boys are working together. They're talking, but they're working hard. They're cooperative learners. I'm never going to stop them talking again. And when you know that, like when you run that test the first time and you make a note of who sits where, you see magic happen. You understand your students a lot more, because sitting them all in rows and all in pairs doesn't work for everyone. It will work for 60% of your class, but 40% of your class, they'll be looking out the window, disengaged and not working. And we often miss those children. This is the way to not miss them. It's not possible in every lesson, but if you can do it, it's highly engaging for your students. So I want to give you this quote. Montessori said this. She said, and I've already put this to you, what would you like to know? But the second thing she said is this. When the students brought back the work, when the kids came back and said, hey, Mrs. Thompson, this is what I learned about volcanoes. Did you know that lava is 5,000 degrees? And they give you the information back. You say to your students, that's really good. What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with this knowledge you have? Like, what are you going to do to change the world? Now, yes, they can write it in their book and you can put a tick and you can put it in their folder or you can send it home, and that's okay. But what if you wanted them to take action with it? What if they made a poster and that poster went in the local library? What if they did some work about cleaning the environment? If they make a poster on cleaning the environment and it sits in the classroom, well, that's not going to have any impact. If you say, I would like you to put it in an envelope and post it to a local politician and wait for a reply. Or if you say, on your way home from school today, I want you to stick it up in a shop window or pop it on a tree or do something with it. And that is actionable and tangible. We empower our students to feel like they can make a difference. Because quite often what happens is, and I'll show you a real life example of this in a second, what happens is our students see problems around the world of famine and hunger and starvation and global warming. They look at the news and they go, well, I can't do anything about that because I'm only a kid. And, all I do is write work in my book and, Miss just ticks my book and we close the book and put it on the shelf and I get a grade A, but I didn't do anything with it. What if almost everything you did something with? Now, it doesn't have to be big. You can just say to them, that's an amazing poster. Would you like to go to the grade 1 students and teach them about volcanoes? And say, can I really do this? Of course you can. Off you go. And they go down to grade 1. They say, hello, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm going to teach you about volcanoes. Would you like to look at my poster? You've immediately ticked off half the curriculum: speaking and listening, leadership, communication, mentorship, writing, persuasive devices. All this stuff is done. You didn't have to teach it. It just became organic because you said to the students, what are you going to do with what you've just learned? And when we have that added bonus in our lessons, we see magic happen. I'm going to show you a real tangible example, and you'll probably all start crying in a minute, but I hope not. So get your tissues ready. Okay. So we discovered that education is not something which the teacher does. but it is a natural process which develops spontaneously in the human being. It is not acquired by listening to words, that's the truth, but it's the virtue of experiences in which the child acts on his environment. So what this is saying is your children need to be doing stuff. And when I say doing stuff, I don't mean filling in a worksheet or completing a textbook. That's not doing stuff. That's filling in a form. And we all know how much we hate filling in forms. Your students also hate filling in forms too. So get them to do stuff. And who cares if they get it wrong? From great deals of experimentation come learning. When Jeff Bezos created Amazon, he'd already created pets.com and wasted $1 billion. It was a failure. And then he learned, that was terrible. I've just lost $1 billion, but I've learned what to do next. Now, when I open Amazon.com, I'm going to learn from my mistakes. And now he's the richest man in the world. Not that money is the thing we want, but what I'm trying to say is from mistakes comes great avenues of learning. The teacher's task is not to talk, but to prepare the environment and the motives of cultural activity in a special environment for the child. So it's not about you talking. It's about you engaging the children to be able to do. Now, here's where you might all start crying. So get your tissues ready so I can explain this to you. Now, I run a school. And I'm an advocate for this kind of learning, as you can probably tell. And so in my school, always, in every lesson, in every class, we say to the students, you're going to learn about this. What do you want to know? And what are you going to do with the knowledge you have gained? Now, these girls here are 4 girls from my school. They had been researching Burma, Myanmar, which is not too far away from India, just over the water there, over the Indian Ocean. I've been there, beautiful place. They were researching Myanmar. They made a project on Myanmar, which was beautiful. They came to my office as the principal and said, Gavin, do you like our project? I said, you know what? I love your project, but what are you going to do with it? Before I can tell you what I really think, what are you going to do with it? Now, these girls are 10 years old. What are you going to do with it? So they said, Gavin, when we were doing our research, we found out that the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar have been persecuted. And actually, lots of refugees are going to be coming to Australia in a month's time. And we want to help them. I said, wow, this is a really good mission. But you're only 10 years old and you're in Australia. How do you even think you're going to help them? And this is where the magic begins. And you're all teachers. So you all want this. This is why you became a teacher. And this is how we get there. So I said, how are you going to do that? They said, well, Gavin, we have an idea. So here's where we begin. By the way, they call themselves CAMP, which is an acronym for their surname, for their first names. I won't give you the names, but the acronym is there. So they said, Gavin, we called ourselves CAMP. That's the name of our organization. These are 10 years old. So the first thing they did is they started to do some research. And they came up with an idea. They said, Gavin, there's going to be a lot of refugees arriving here, children, and when their mums and dads are being killed, they don't have parents. We want to show them that we care. So what we want to do is we want to buy 150 backpacks. We want to fill them with everything they will need for their first day at school. An umbrella, a ruler, some pencils, a teddy bear, a dictionary, a lunchbox, a cuddly toy, a jacket, so that when they arrive, we can give them to them and they will know that somebody loves them. I said, oh my God, this is amazing. So the first thing they did is they started to do their research. Now, there's no curriculum here and there's no teacher, but you just look at those girls. They are learning. They're negotiating, collaborating, working as a team, communicating. They are working. This is real work. I could tick off half of the curriculum with just this one part. So I said, look, in order to do this, you're going to need about $500. It's a lot of money. How are you going to get it? They said, well, we want to have a bake sale. We want to sell some cakes at school. And so we raised them. I said, well, $500 from a bake sale is a lot of money to raise. You're going to need help. They said, Gavin, we want to meet the parent community, the parent committee, and show them our work. So they put together a PowerPoint presentation. They got the mums into my office and they presented and they persuaded the mums that this was something that needed to happen. These mums were highly inspired. Now look, these girls have made a PowerPoint presentation. They've rigged up the computer, they put the HDMI cable in themselves, and they spoke to those mums with power and with motive and with emotion. Those mums were all like, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to raise that $500. 2 days later, we had a bake sale. And the girls raised $500. In fact, $540. And they bought the backpacks. Now you can see that blue backpack in the background over there. They bought 150 backpacks. And then they said to me, Gavin, we're going to send out the backpack to the parents with a note inside it. And the note says, here's what we want. We don't want your junk. We only want these things. Because parents often go, oh my God, there's a collection at school. Let's get rid of all the junk in the house. We don't want the junk. They said, well, here's a list of things that we do want. We will only accept these things. And they wrote a list. And they went inside the backpack. They then stood outside school every day for 2 weeks. And every mom that came to school to drop off their children, the girls got them and said, excuse me, Barbara, come over here. We need you to take a backpack home and fill it with rulers and pencils. And they persuaded the parents that this was a good idea. And the parents were highly engaged. The community, they'd activated the entire community at this point. So the moms all went home. 150 backpacks went home to 150 houses. 3 weeks later, they all came back filled with stuff. And the girls had succeeded. And I said to the girls, can I ask you a question? Why have you got green, black, and blue? I didn't know why you did that. They said, Gavin, the green ones are for 3 to 6 year olds, the blue ones are for 6 to 9 year olds, and the black ones are for 9 to 12 year olds. And we've organized all the things inside so they're age appropriate. Now, these girls are 10, by the way, just to let you know, they are 10 years old. Now, at this point, what I could have done is taken the backpacks and sent them off to an organization, and that's it. We've done a great job. No. We're missing a big component here. These girls need to see that those backpacks have arrived where they need to arrive. They've got to see that. If they don't see it, then I've failed. It's like when you walk past the supermarket and there's a lady outside and she's saying, please, can I have some money? You're more likely to give her money than to donate it to the Red Cross. Because when you give her the money, she smiles at you and you go, I'm a good person. You get feedback. Your students need the feedback too. So I said to the girls, how are you going to get these backpacks to the children who need to get them? So Gavin, can we use the telephone in your office? I said, of course you can. They came in and they called the 2 organizations who help Myanmar refugees. And they interviewed the CEOs of each. They said, we want to interview them to see which one we like the most. Now, these girls are 10. Now, the guy on the left, you can see he's not doing a very good job. They've got their arms crossed. He did not impress them. On the right, these ladies, they were highly impressive. And the girls, they chose the women on the right-hand side, the House of Sakina. And I asked them, why did you choose that organization? They said, Gavin, we're all women, and it's run by women. We want to empower women. We're choosing the women's organization, which was pretty amazing, really. So they interviewed them. They chose the House of Sakina, who then came to our school in a bus. And the girls loaded the backpacks onto the bus. And off they went to the organization. And the last part is that when they arrived at the organization, these girls in this picture here are Myanmar refugees whose mums and dads have been executed. They don't have any parents. And when they arrived at the detention center in Australia, thinking that nobody cares, somebody handed them backpacks and they opened them. And inside were toys and lunchboxes and books. And at that moment, these girls knew that somebody cared about them. They were saying, somebody actually cares about us, even though we had no idea. And it's that empowerment of our students. When I showed this video to the girls in my office, they were all crying. And you know why they were crying? Because it felt so good. What they'd done, they realized that even though they were 10 years old and they were sitting in a classroom in Australia, at that moment, they realized they had the power to change the world. And we can do that. So I implore you in your classes to ask that very extra special question, which is, what are you going to do with what you have just learned? Now, whether it's taking a poster down to grade 1 to teach them about volcanoes or helping some Myanmar refugees, what's very, very important is they get to actually do it. Because when they do it and they do that special thing, then the magic happens. We have empowerment. I mean, I can't tell you, it was the school holidays after that. And when I came back to school, those 4 girls were standing outside my office. The first day, the first minute, I said, hello girls, can I help you? I said, Gavin, we have another project we'd like to do. And this one was about helping women who'd been abused during lockdown. And they did that too. Those girls are 10. But when they're 16, when they're 25, they'll be leaders in the world that you want to have. They'll be change makers. They'll be the ones who sit with lonely children on the playground in high school. They're the ones who care. And that's what we have to do. That's essentially what making it real. It makes it real. So I implore you to, yes, teach the curriculum. Yes, use your textbook, but add that extra bonus is, what are you going to do with what you have just produced? If it's a poster, where are you going to take it? If it's a story, who are you going to read it to that wants to hear it? You know, this is what we have to add. So without making you cry too much more, I will move on to the next slide. So that is the end of presentation number 1. Now, I hope that you've enjoyed that presentation, and I hope I haven't been talking for too long. What I want to do is just very quickly is just allow you to go into breakout groups for 5 minutes, and I'll just organize the breakout groups in a second. And what I want to do in the breakout group is basically this. I just want you to have a look at the way you teach now, the lessons you teach, and how you can maybe integrate some of this real life learning into your pedagogy right now. We'll do that just for 5 minutes, and I'll just break you out into groups. How many do we have here? We'll grow into groups of 3, and I'll do that now. So off you go. We're just going to discuss how can we integrate real life learning into our curriculum right now. Okay, I hope you had a good chat, probably longer than was anticipated. I do apologize for that. Does anyone want to share anything or have a quick 1 minute to share something that came up in their group? What about you, Ira? You've been nodding and smiling a lot during the presentation. A lot seems to resonate with you. What came up in your group?
The first thing that came up was that the person who joined the group was from Genesis only, and I had no idea. So she was from my school itself. So we met online. She's just joined recently, a month back. So that was the first thing, the first connect that happened. She shared about the project that they did with water pollution, researching on that, and then taking them around different water bodies surrounding areas of NCR, Delhi NCR, and actually finding out and testing out and doing all that. And so that's what we discussed. And what I shared was something that I told her was not kind of academic, but just before winter break, my students wanted to have an in-class carnival, Christmas carnival. But due to COVID protocol, we couldn't do it for the whole grade or for whole primary because we had those restrictions. So they went ahead, they planned everything, they decided on what games to play, and then they made, put the furniture accordingly, made the rules, decided all the things, and then they had that carnival on the last day, invited some of the other grades, in groups, smaller groups, and went ahead. So we were discussing, there were so many skills that they developed at that time. They had limited time to prepare for it, what to do, how to do, how to work. Some of them were working individually, as you shared. That's why I was nodding and doing all those things while you were sharing it. Some of them decided to do it individually. Some of them were in pairs. Some of them did it in groups. But yeah, it came out, and they had that smile and spark on their face when they went back, because they could do it. They wanted to do it. They could, share it with some of the other grades as well. So that's what we talked about.
Yeah, amazing. And that's the autonomy and the agency that we want in our students. They're so much more inspired when that goes ahead. All right, thank you. Sorry for picking on you, Ira, just that you seemed very engaged, so I thought I'd choose you. Now, okay, I've got another presentation. And in this next presentation, which should last about 50 minutes, I've got a couple of things to give away for you. And so you'll probably need a smartphone or something that you can scan a QR code with. And what will happen is, when you scan the QR code, it will then download a document onto your phone, and you can email it to your peers or send it anywhere you like. I've got a couple of really good resources here, which I think should help you going forward. So this section here, the first part was based around Montessori methodology and what Montessori did in order. The reason I chose Montessori is because I'm Montessori trained and you're in India. And India has the most Montessori schools of any country in the entire world. So a lot of your primary school children or high school children will have been through a Montessori experience. And so the reason I chose that was because you are going to be receiving those children in primary school and in high school, they probably have an independent aspect to the way they learn already. So in this section, this is about, we've already talked about innovating in the way that we teach and the way we set up our classrooms. These are key components of what makes a good teacher in reality. And we have some aspects in here around essential skills. So we talked earlier about the skills that we need to look for in the classroom. Today, in this session, we'll talk about what they are. And I'll give you a tangible curriculum you can take away and implement in your school as soon as school's open. Something you can run for the entire year that will allow you to establish a routine around those skills. But also, it's very important to critically think about yourself as a teacher. Quite often we think, well, I've done my degree, I'm a teacher now, so I'm probably fine. But maybe you're not that good. I don't mean you're not that good. What I mean is maybe your students have got advice for you that you've never heard. And you need to ask them, hey, was that a good lesson? And so actually, I would have preferred it if we could do more of this. And it's good to know that. It's good to take advice from the students, because ultimately they're your customers. They're your customers. It's like you've gone to a restaurant and the waitress brings over some food. Like, you're bringing education into their brains. It's got to be on their terms. So why not ask them, how was that? Did you like that? Is there something I could change? Now, the reason I've got this picture here, I always like to start with a nice story to get you interested. And that's essentially what we do as teachers. Plato, one of the most famous philosophers, said, those who can tell the greatest stories will rule the land. And this is true, if you think about it. Our politicians are wonderful storytellers. Our historians are wonderful storytellers. Our indigenous populations, the elders in those populations are wonderful storytellers. And you as teachers, you're also a storyteller. You know what it's like. You've got the children in a group and you're telling a story and they can't wait for the next word, even though it's a terrible story. So I thought I would share a story with you, one that you won't forget. Maybe Yinan, this might be something that I'm not sure, we'll see. Now this picture is how tea was invented. Now I'm drinking tea now, actually drinking Chinese tea. So I'm just going to have a quick drink. It's delicious. Did you know how tea was invented? I'm going to tell you how tea was invented. So an emperor in China was sitting in his huge garden with all of his servants around him. And as Chinese people do, and as they did for many years, he was drinking warm water. Warm water is supposed to be beautiful for your internal digestive system and to calm your anxiety. Now, on this particular day, he was sitting and he was talking to all of his servants. There was a bit of a storm, and some wind blew one of the branches above his head. It just happened to be a tea plant. Now, some of the leaves floated down from that plant and landed in his hot water. He didn't notice. And then he had a drink. And then one of his servants said, whoa, you're drinking that water, it's green. He said, well, it tastes delicious. And he looked into the glass and there was some leaves that had blown from the plant and landed in his hot water and became tea. And then he said, okay, collect all of the leaves. We're going to sell it. And that is how tea was created in China. So it was invented completely by accident. Now, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter. The point is that you will all remember that now, as I did the first time I heard it. And you can go and investigate that. Maybe you want to go and find out if I'm actually telling the truth or not. But your students will also do that. And when we want to get our students hooked on what we're teaching, we should always try to start with a really, really good story, because that's what they will take home with them. That's what they will tell dad. When dad says, oh, how was school today? Did you learn anything? He'll say, did you know, dad, how tea was invented? And you will always remember that story now as adults. Every time you have a cup of green tea, you'll think, I know how this was invented. And we want to do that with our students. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. Let me just get into this. I don't know why it's not moving. Okay. So just a bit of history about myself. For the last 5 years, I've been building schools in the Himalayas, in Nepal, in Ladakh, in Sikkim, Darjeeling. I've been raising money in school, and I've been going to the Himalayas and building schools. And you might think, why would I bother to do that? Well, I tell you why. Number one, because I love it. But number two, because I want to show the students in my school that anything's possible. They look up to us. We are their role models. What we do, they will do. What we be, they will be. How we act, they will act. If you want your students to read in your classroom, read yourself. Say to them, we're all going to read now this book. I'm going to read and you're going to read. We're going to read together. If you want them to be quiet, be quiet. Don't shout. If you shout, they will shout. If you want them to be kind, be kind. Montessori said, model the behavior you wish to view in your students. So the reason I've been building schools in the Himalayas is I want my students to feel that they can also do anything. And I bring these kind of pictures back to my students and show them. Look what I did in the holidays. What are you going to do in your holidays? And they want to be like you, so they do these kind of things. By the way, this is a very cute picture also. All of these clothes were donated by my students. I brought them back to school and I said, look at those clothes you gave me. They're your pajamas. Look at those children being really warm now in the Himalayas. And they say, oh, I'm going to bring more clothes next week. I'm going to bring some shoes. Like just giving them, being the bridge between them and the change that needs to happen. And the question is, how can we change the way we run our institutions to establish a culture of collective responsibility? Well, that responsibility starts with you. Well, maybe not you, maybe you are coordinators, but your teachers. As teachers, we need to be honest. We need to be honest and we need to be self-critical. We need to understand, are we actually doing a good job? Sometimes we slip into something which is not quite good. We need to always keep heed of this. Now, I've worked in some terrible schools in my life, in London, in France, where these things were part of everything. I say, if you're doing any of these things, you need to rethink. Number one, are you shouting? Do you shout at your students? If you do, I'm afraid you need to stop. Because when you shout, you've failed. That means you've lost straight away. You don't need to shout. If you just talk quietly, they will listen because you're very interested in what you're saying. Number two, do you ever send students outside? Are you saying, get out of my classroom? You failed. You haven't managed their behavior. You haven't prepared the environment correctly. Regardless of their behavior is reminiscent of the level of the teaching that's going on in the classroom. Number three, are you giving detentions? Oh no, we should never be using detentions as punishment. The punishment for the child is you didn't get the knowledge. You didn't get the knowledge you wanted. You know, I was teaching you this thing about mathematics because you're going to need it for this reason, and you didn't get it. That's the failure you have today. And the repercussions of you not listening or not working hard are you don't have the knowledge anymore. Giving them a detention is not going to work. Are you not looking forward to school as a teacher? So, you know, VJ, if you're at home on a Sunday night, this is Sunday. If you're like, oh God, I'm really not looking forward to going to school tomorrow, that means that you haven't actually got the curriculum to a place which is interesting for you. You need to be also interested in what you're teaching. If you're not looking forward to it, rethink what you're teaching and how you're going to deliver it. Number five, are you bored of your own teaching? When you look at the lesson plan in front of you, if you are bored of it, then your students are very astute. They can sniff it when you're bored. And if you're bored, they will be even boreder. I don't even know if bored is a word. They will be even more bored, yes, than you. So if it's boring, make it exciting for you and for them. Number six, are you using worksheets every day? If you are, I'm afraid you need to rethink that. Worksheets are okay, but they're not okay every day. Think of other ways they can represent their research. Number seven, do you ever publicly humiliate a child? Do you say, stand up, come to the front? I can't believe what you just did in this class. That is humiliating. Because what happens then is something very important in child psychology, is this. The child sits there and you give them attention for doing the wrong thing. And they say, I'm getting attention for doing the wrong thing. I'm just going to keep doing the wrong thing because I'm going to get attention for that. The key component there is to try your best to ignore that behavior. And when the child does something that's a tiny bit good, you say, oh my God, everybody stop what you're doing. Come up to the front, Ahmed. I cannot believe that sentence is so beautiful. In fact, it's the most beautiful sentence I've ever seen. Everybody give him a round of applause. And Ahmed says, oh my God, I'm getting attention for doing things that are good. I'm only going to be good. And so it takes a bit of patience in you as the teacher, but once you've done it, you have this beautiful classroom. Number eight, are you working in isolation? Are you not sharing your work? Are you keeping it to yourself and saying, I made this worksheet, I'm not sharing it with anybody? If you're doing that, you're failing the system, you're failing the global education movement. I based my whole life on giving everything away. I make worksheets, I make everything, I give it away to everybody. People, we've got to share our pedagogies. Number nine, are you unprepared? If you're unprepared, you know how it is. Your lesson will be a failure. They will know that you're unprepared. They will sniff it out of you. They will eat you for breakfast, those 6-year-olds. You've got to be prepared. Preparation is 99% of the success you will have. And number 10, do you send negative emails home to parents? Don't do that. Only send an email home if it's positive. If it's negative, you have a conversation. And this is, I use this as a kind of checklist for myself and for my teachers. Let's talk about this. How are we doing? And the teachers say, I'm going to do that one a bit better, actually. I'm going to be more prepared, or I'm going to try to use worksheets only 1 day per week. Now, this is a beautiful picture of one of the schools I have in Nepal. And what we see here is we're trying to build a positive environment in your classroom. How do we do that? We give them ownership. We say to the students, what are you going to do with what you've just learned? This little boy, he's only 4. He just learned how to use the cylinder blocks. And so he said to me, Gavin, I know how to do it. I said, wonderful. What are you going to do? He said, I want to teach a class. So of course you can. So he got some children and he asked them to sit down and he taught them how to use the cylinder blocks. Look how interesting it is. Look how amazing that moment is. Leadership, mentorship, speaking and listening, a beautiful moment here for those students. And what we want is to understand is this, that not all work has to be written down. There's no writing here. There's no piece of paper, no tick, no grade, no percentage, no score, no ranking, nothing. But there's an amazing amount of learning taking place right there and then. Collaboration, leadership, mentorship, speaking and listening, negotiation, communication, understanding, perseverance, determination, blah, blah, blah. I could go on for a very long time. Nothing is written down. So we have to make sure, yes, VJ?
You very rightly said that there is no record or accountability. There is no paperwork, no writing. Then how are you going to convince parents? Because parents are also part of this.
Well,
So,
I'm not saying you never write anything down. What I'm saying is not everything has to be written down. So what I would do in this situation, VJ, to give that explanation to the parents is I would say, while this is taking place, like while he's teaching, I'm observing and I'm making notes about leadership and communication and compromise and negotiation, because they're the things actually that in the future will get your son the best job in the world. And we'll come to that later. You know, when you want to go and work for Google and you walk into the office for your interview, everybody has an amazing resume. Everybody has an amazing resume for the best jobs. You know who gets the job? The person who can look them in the eye, convince and persuade them that they are the right person for the job, explain that they've made mistakes, they've learned from those things. And it's this kind of activity that allows that to happen. So, and I've done this, I did this in ICRA International School in Hyderabad. They've got thousands and thousands of children. And we went to a Montessori method and I met all the parents. And the first thing I did was tell them why we should go to this kind of educational platform and this kind of delivery. And when you explain that it's about skills, implementing skills alongside the common pedagogy, the parents, they want it because they know it's important. And you know it's important, you know. I can't deliver this presentation to you unless I can speak clearly. You know, I can't get a good job unless I can present with a convincing, language. This is where it happens. It doesn't happen in your textbook. It doesn't happen when you're sitting in silence. And so there has to be a balance, and it's all about having a balance. But it's a very good question. This is the most important slide in the entire presentation. In fact, the most important slide I've ever presented ever to anyone. If you're going to take a photo of any slide, this is the slide you take a photo of. Because of this, you're all teachers, and your teachers at the top, those 3 components at the top, differentiation is the most important thing with teachers, meeting everybody's needs. So you can differentiate the content, which means you can make it harder or easier how you teach. You can differentiate the process, which is how you are going to teach it. You can also differentiate the product. You can say, this is the result I want from my students. That's easy. All of those things are easy, and you can all do them, and any teacher can do them in the world. Let's go to the bottom row. All of these things you want from your students, and every parent wants them to. You want growth. You want your students to grow, get better at something or everything. You want them to be motivated. You want them to love coming to school and want to work. And you want them to be efficient, to get the work done as quick as they possibly can with the result as quick as possibly can happen. It's the middle part. The middle bit is the most important bit. And this is what we all miss. The first part is readiness. You look at your class and you decide, is everybody ready for this lesson? And those who are not ready, they do not give them the lesson. Because it's no point in delivering a lesson when you are not ready. If I try to teach you French now, how to speak French, but you have no vocabulary, you will not understand my sentence when I say, qu'est-ce que tu fais ce soir? You will not understand. But if you have some understanding of the language, maybe you will. And so if they're not ready, you don't teach it. You need to know that. So are they ready? Number 2, the interests, the middle part. Do you know what everybody's interested in? Do you know their hook, as we spoke about in the beginning? If you don't know everyone's hook, you need to know their hook. And number 3, do you know their learning profile? How do they like to work? Are they isolated, parallel, cooperative, or collaborative learner? Which one are they? Do you know that? And do they have any learning needs you need to cater for? When you know the middle three, learning will take place, and it will take place efficiently with growth, and the students will be motivated. But those three things in the center are the most important aspects. So if you are delivering this to your teachers in your school, I would implore you to get them to know if every child is ready. And if they're not, you miss them out. They do something else while you teach this lesson. You get them when they're ready. Number two, what are their interests? And number three, what are their learning profiles? When you have all those components in place, growth, motivation, and efficiency will always take place. Now, this is a freebie. I'm going to give this to you. This is something I created last year. Over 100,000 schools around the world are already using it. So I did a lot of research around essential skills. Now, essential skills are skills that are set your child up for the 21st and 22nd generation, the century. Because the reality is that we can have all the academics in the world we want. We can be really good at mathematics. We can be amazing at writing. We can be a wonderful reader. But without skills that go alongside them, we're never really going to get too far. This is the fact. So we have to make a mix of academic achievements and skill-based curriculum. Now, what I've made for you here is a yearly timetable. These are the top 40 skills on Earth that the top 100 companies are looking for in their future employees. So Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, Tesla, when they interview their new prospective employees, they look for these 40 skills: humility, love, humor, compromise, independence, confidence, resilience. So what I've done is I've split them up over 4 terms. So each week, let's say you were looking at week 2, and week 2, and it was term 3, conversation skills, right? And we're talking about what are conversation skills. In that given week, in term 3, week 2, the whole school is looking at conversation skills. So whenever you have a free moment to do a group lesson, or you have a meeting around the table, or it's time for story time, we talk about conversations. What does a conversation look like? How do we actually have a conversation? And the whole school is on a movement at the same time. Now, what I've done for you is I put this together, and it's a 5 or 6 page booklet. And if you scan that QR code now with your phone, the booklet will just download onto your telephone, and then you can save it and email it. Now, while you're doing that, I'll tell you something really, really interesting. A kindergarten child right now in your school will graduate in 12 years' time. That's 2033, okay? 2033. Now, who knows what the world will look like in 2033? You might think nothing will have changed. Let me tell you an interesting fact. 12 years ago, in 2009, there was no electric cars on the road. Google Maps had not been invented, and the iPhone had just been released. That was 12 years ago. So in 12 years from now, we can't even imagine what's going to be out there. So we don't know what content the students need. What you do know is the skills they will need. They will need those skills forever. These are never going to go out of fashion. So we need to make sure they are always there. They are at the forefront of everything. Now, we're going to have a little activity now, and I'm going to do this just for 5 minutes. So you have to kind of listen carefully to the instructions here, and hopefully this breakout group thing works, because it didn't work last time, but we'll see how it goes. So in this activity, in fact, no, we won't do the activity because we're running out of time. But what I wanted to say to you was there is a really nice activity you can do on active listening. And the way it works is this. You say to the students, we're going to be an active listener now. And you get one person to tell a little story about the time when they felt the most afraid in their life. And everybody else listens to that story very carefully. No one says a word, no one nods their head, raise an eyebrow, nothing. You just listen. And then somebody tells you the story back to you to say, so what you said is this. And all that does is it shows that you are listening. Because quite often what we do is we're trying to be really efficient, and we finish people's sentences for them. Someone's trying to tell something and we finish it. They say, well, at the weekend, I would say, well, we went to the park, it was great, thanks so much. And we finish the sentence for them, thinking that we're helping them. But actually, there's nothing more insulting than someone interrupting you and finishing your sentence. You want to be heard. And our students want to be heard too. Probably very common is you've heard parents do that. A child's like, at the weekend, we went to the park, and mum will say, yeah, we fed the ducks and we went to our cousin's house, let's go now. And the child is like, but I was wanting to say that myself. And we feel that we're helping them, but actually we're hindering them. Now, this is a classroom for all learners. And we said before that we have our types of learners, we have our 4 types of learners. This is a picture of a classroom in Botswana. And as you can see, there is no movement, there is no choice, there is no voice. And what will happen in this room? We'll miss half the people out. People won't get to sit where they want. There's no parallel learning in here. There's no cooperative learning in here. This is about I will teach and you will listen. And we're probably the children in the middle, they will learn. Children on the left, they'll be looking out the window. Children on the right, they'll be dreaming because we haven't allowed them to learn in a way that suits them. This is reminiscent of many schools around the world that look like this. In fact, I've taught a class just like that. But we need to move away from that as much as we possibly can. Now, these are 5 statements that I think are probably the most important statements that you can have in your classroom. So our first job is allow them to have freedom, and that freedom comes within limits. And here are the 5 statements. You can sit where you like. I don't mind. It's up to you. You can work with whom you wish. I don't mind how you represent your research. So if a child says, I want to build a model, you say that's fine, and you can build a model. I want to draw a diagram, you can draw a diagram, that's fine. They will still learn. The learning will still take place, but they get to feel as if they're following their passion. Number 4, you can take longer than the designated time frame allocated if you're really interested. And as I said at the very beginning, when we interrupt somebody when they're in the middle of something, there's nothing worse. So if you have a group of children and they're in the thick of it, they're in the focus and they're working hard, try as hard as you possibly can to leave them to that. Make a note and catch up on that lesson later on. If you can do that, you will establish a real sense of independence in your room. And at the very end, how are you going to share your work with others? Whether you share it with the class or share it with the wider community. And the reason I've chosen the picture there is because children have an amazing level of imagination. Look at those children. They're holding up a shoe, but they think it's an iPhone and they're taking a selfie. Everyone's smiling for this photograph that's never going to happen. Their imagination is timeless. Their creativity is something you can't unharness. So if you have the students, you say, I don't mind what you do. I don't mind how you show me. Sit back and watch what comes back to you. It is amazing when we give them freedom within limits, the way that they come back to us. Now, over the 25 years that I've worked as a teacher, I wanted to put together what I thought was the perfect lesson. You know, if I had 90 minutes to teach a lesson, what would it look like? And I divided it up into percentages. Now, I'm not a famous educational philosopher or anything like this. I'm not saying I'm Piaget or Maria Montessori, but I have taught for 25 years and I've observed thousands of lessons. So I wrote this down and I want to talk it through with you for a second, if you don't mind, just to share with you what I think would be the perfect lesson in the classroom. So the first part is, what am I going to teach you today? This is what I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you about volcanoes. Number 2, why am I bothering to teach this to you? Why do you have to be here? You know, and that number 2, if you can't do that, then don't teach it. If you can't tell your students why they need to understand fractions, you shouldn't be teaching it, because they need to know that. They have a right to know why you are bothering to tell them this stuff. It's very important that they know that, because once they know, they will be more engaged. Number 3, what skills are you going to use today? Going back to the skills planner. Are you going to be looking at cooperation? Is this about confidence? Is this about cooperation or, you know, communication? Then comes the explicit teaching, which takes about 15%. A small amount of time is where you teach it. You say, here's what you're going to do, and here's what you need to know. And you have a small amount of time of you doing that. We don't want to hear your voice for too long. I don't want to hear you talking for 60 minutes. All we want you to do is inspire them. Then the students ask questions. What about this? What about that? Can we know about this? How hot is lava? Why is there volcanoes on the moon? They ask their own questions. And then comes the independent research. And you can see that takes a large bulk of the lesson. 30% of your lesson should be the children working independently. 30%, 1/3 of the whole lesson. And then comes the representation, which is when they come back and they feed it back to the class. They show you what they have learned and how they've learned it. And then at the end, they use their research to tell others. And at the very, very end of this, the 4% is feedback. This is where the teacher says, here is what I saw taking place to the students. and asks a very important question. Was this a good lesson? Did I do a good job? And you know, when you ask 6-year-olds if you did a good job, they are so honest. They will tell you, it was really boring. I was really bored, sir, in this lesson. And, you know, you've got to allow them to have voice, because if it's boring, you need to know that, you know, we can't do everything right all the time. Give them the opportunity to say, by the way, I saw Thomas, amazing leadership. You were running your group so well, and your voice was so clear. And Thomas said, oh, thank you. I'm so proud of myself. And you say, what did I do a good job? And he said, well, you talked a bit too quickly. I couldn't understand what you were saying. And the diagram was a bit blurry because you got it off Google and you didn't download it correctly. Oh my, yeah. And this, you need to know that. It's very important. It builds trust as well with your students. They know they can tell you anything, which is highly important. Now, we talked about those 4 types of learners earlier on. Now, this is why. This is the 4 things that you need to do. While your students are working independently and they're in their groups, what do you do? Like, what are you actually going to do as the teacher when they're all working? Well, number 1, you observe the class. You sit back and you take notes. What's happening here? Number 2, you give them choice and you give them freedom. This is a very, very important part. You say to them, everything in this classroom is yes. Everything that you can see is yes. If you need the scissors, the answer is yes. If you need paper, yes. Card, yes. Colors, yes. Everything is yes. You don't need to ask me. Everything you can see is yes. Obviously, you can't climb out of the window and run away. That's a no. But most of the things in here are yes. Now, I got a t-shirt made and it said yes in huge letters on it. And I said to the students, if you have a question, just look at my t-shirt. That's your answer. And the kids were looking over, oh, it says yes. And the reason why you do that is because you don't want them to come over and interrupt you. You're observing, or you're working with a group of students. You don't want them to come and ask permission for everything. Can I use the scissors? Of course you can use the scissors. You know, they're yours. This is your classroom. I put them on the table earlier. You don't need to ask me. Can I go to the toilet? Of course you can. You don't need to ask me that question. As long as somebody else isn't already in the toilet, the answer is yes. So freedom within limits. You don't have to control everything. When you give them freedom, you free up yourself. And when you have time, you can observe, because we often don't get a chance to observe. Number 3, you need to encourage collaboration. We want teamwork here. When they talk, real learning takes place. And number 4 is you talk to them and you listen to their answers. Make sure you listen. Don't ignore what they say. They are your customers. Now, I put a picture of me here for a reason. I'm a geography teacher. My specialty is geography and geology. Now, what I say to you is this as teachers. I say to you this, that as a teacher, you need to be interested in what you're teaching. You need to feel enthusiastic about the subjects you are teaching. Now, curriculums all around the world are quite prescribed. It says, say this, do this, teach that. But there's always a way to bring your personal interests into the curriculum. And if you can, then you will be inspiring. And when you are inspiring, your students will be inspired. So, for example, in this lesson that I was teaching, this lesson was about narrative writing. It's about writing a story. So I had this picture and I said to the students, today we're going to learn about how to write a story. And the students said, wow, look at you, Gavin, you're on a rock. Look, it's very dangerous. And I said, yes, I climbed that mountain so I could have a wonderful view. And I made a story about this picture you can see. And I said to the students, now I want you to think of a time when you were in danger and you're going to write a story. And because of the picture, I was in the picture. They were like, wow, Gavin's a real person. He doesn't live in the cupboard. He actually does real things. And he gets scared just like I get scared. And so when we make the curriculum personal to us, our students are inspired. And we are also inspired because this is interesting to us too. You know, if I was teaching a narrative writing about a mushroom that got lost in the forest, well, I'm not bothered about that, but I'm bothered about this. And our students can see that in you. So as leaders, if you're a curriculum leader or you're a coordinator, say to your teachers, you know, look, it says this in the curriculum, but I don't mind if you make it a little bit different. I don't mind if you make it personal to you. I don't mind if you tweak it, twist it, or even rewrite the entire thing. If it's going to be inspiring, go ahead and do that, because our students will be inspired too. very, very important. By the way, it wasn't as dangerous as it looks. It just looks very dangerous, but it's not that bad. So don't feel like I'm a risk taker. I'm a very careful person. Okay. Now, this is something controversial, but I'll throw this at you here. You're in India, and I know homework is a very big thing in India, as it is in China, as it is in Australia and the UK. What we want to do is move away from homework as much as we possibly can. Really hard for parents, because parents want homework. They're like, I want my child doing homework every night, 2 hours. That means that they're a really good student. But actually, the reason the parents want that is they want their kids to be busy while they're doing something else. That's why they want homework. What we want to do is allow our students to continue their classwork at home. If you're a really inspiring teacher, students will just continue when they get home. Now, I've made this document for you. It's called 100 Practical Life Activities. Now, I would ask you to scan the QR code while I explain what it does for you. Now, you have this in your classroom and you stick it on the wall, or every child has a copy in their book. Also, a copy sent home to every family, and they put it on the fridge. There's 100 activities there. Each activity on that list is practical. You can do it, but it also has an avenue to learning. There's something linked in it to learning, real life learning. So as students finish their work in the class, they go, Miss, I finished. What we normally do is we give them another worksheet. We say, oh no, he's finished and he's going to be bored. Here's more work. Have some more work. And the child's like, oh God, every time I finish my work, I get more work. I'm not going to finish early anymore. What we want to do is say, when you've finished your work, you can turn to this page and you can choose anything on this list and you can do it. And the child says, oh my goodness, really? Can I do that? Of course they can. And each one of these is linked to education. Some of them you can't do in the classroom, you can only do at home. Some are not appropriate for younger students, they're only appropriate for older students. But I would try to have this as part of your normal learning in your classroom. Instead of having fast finishes where they do more work, when you're finished, you can do something practical, practical life. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. Maybe there's some plant pots in the corner of your classroom, and there's a bag of soil, and there's some seeds. When you're finished, you can go and plant a flower. And they go over there, they take the soil, they pop it into the pot, they take a seed or a sunflower seed, they pop it in, they water it, and they put it outside. And they do that, and they see it grow. When you establish this independence in your students and you prepare the environment so they can do these things, and you can change my list, you can cut some things out and get rid of it, it doesn't matter. But having a practical life list at home and at school is extremely important. And you may think, I don't think it's possible, Gavin. Well, I've done this. I've done this in Hyderabad, Bangalore, in Mumbai. I've done this in Ladakh. Schools are running this right now. They've changed homework for this because parents want this. Parents want help at home. You know, there's a really amazing Montessori quote, and it says this, that work for an adult is play for the child. So if you're cleaning the house, and we all know this as teachers, if you say to your students, I'd like you to clean the classroom, they love it. They love cleaning the classroom. We don't, they do. And the reason why, because they want to be you. They want to be like you. And for anybody who has children out there, when you're vacuuming the house, that's work. For your 6-year-old, that is not work. They would vacuum the house 24 hours a day if you let them. So work for you is play for them. But it's practical. It's about learning how to be a human being, about learning how to live. Sorry, Ira, you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to add here that I've been following you for a while, and you used to share some during the, the initial lockdowns that we have in India. I used to follow you used to share some weekly timetables for remote learning, I remember. And I used to download them. I had it printed for my kids at home. And we used to follow it diligently with the links. And then there were breaks. And then there were the way you are explaining and giving examples of doing the chores at home. And it worked beautifully for the 2 years that we've been remotely, having our lessons, but practically seeing it working with my kids, giving them the independence that you're talking about. So I just wanted to share that what you're saying is what I've done with what you've already shared earlier at my home with my kids. And I have seen the change in the past 2 years to what you are, trying to explain to everybody here, that it is amazing. So as you said, put the list, and when you're done, you do this, and that's how they go about it now. So it's no more extra screen time, or you are wrecking your brain to think about what I engage them with next. They already know. So these are really helpful, and I have practically used them. So that's what I wanted to share here. That's all.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know if anybody was using them. I was making them and sending them out to the internet. And I thought, I wonder if anyone's using them. And I'm really happy that you actually use them. So that's fantastic. And there's stuff like, if you look at number 5, it says post a letter. And all that means is in your classroom, you have some envelopes, you have some paper, you have a special pen, and you have some stamps. And when they're finished, they get to write a letter to anyone in the world they want. And they post it on the way home in the letterbox. It's only going to cost you the price of an envelope and a stamp and a special table, the letter writing table. And you find that kids, they finish their work. I finished. Can I write a letter to the Prime Minister, to Prime Minister Modi? Of course you can. Go to the letter writing table and they write it, Dear Prime Minister Modi, I would like to, and they put it in the envelope and they put this, lick it and they put it in the post box. And you see that learning becomes real. It becomes real life. It's amazing. And it's not too hard to do that. It's very simple. You just have to think a little bit creatively and make time. Sorry, Lubna, you want to say something? Our hand is up.
Yeah, hi Kevin, how are you? First of all, thank you for this very informative session. Similar to Ira, I do follow you. I'm based in Australia as well, so obviously, very familiar with your work as well that you do all over. So thank you for that. One thing that I encounter, and this is, I think, just location differences. Like when we are in a country like India, there are so many people you can message and contact and do things. And sometimes what I find is I struggle to find such real-time communicative people in Australian settings. So like, when I'm going to say, all right, write a letter to someone, they want to write to someone they can resonate with. So I was wondering if you had a bank of people who are like good with replying and, so that it provides that extra motivation for students as well.
Okay, I do. Of course I do. I actually, very quickly, we're going on a segue here, but I've made a platform called Education Influence.
Yes, I'm a part of that already. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I tell you what to do. Join it, make a profile. In there, you have about 2,000 teachers around the world who are all exactly what you want. You write them a message and say, hello, my students would like to write a letter to your school in Botswana. And they say, no problem, here's my address. They're the teachers that you're looking for. They're all on that platform. I've handpicked every one of them myself. I built the platform. It's my platform. And the reason I built it was for exactly the reason you're saying. Where do I go when I want to make global connections with my students? You go there. They're all waiting for you.
Perfect, because I'm actually a part of that platform already, and I presented at Empathy Week with you, for science and all. So I do know, but I just didn't know that you could contact other teachers through that. So that's brilliant then.
There's a button that says direct message. You can direct message anybody.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Gavin. Thanks.
Okay, I'm worried that we're going to run out of time if we take more questions.
Can I get the details? Can I get the details of that platform?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Is that okay? I'll put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat at the very end. So don't leave yet. Okay, let's continue for a bit. Okay, so we continue. One of the key components is not to tell the students everything. Yes, you're knowledgeable. You know a lot of stuff. You're a teacher, VJ. We know you're smart, but we don't want to tell the kids everything because that leaves nothing to the imagination. So even though I know everything about volcanoes, in fact, volcanology was my specialty at university, I don't tell them everything. I just tell them some really, really good stuff. And then they're like, wow, I didn't know that. And then I say, what would you like to know? And I call it the 20% rule. Just tell them 20% of the good stuff. Leave the 80% for them to go and find out. Because then they come back and they say, did you know actually that the dinosaurs, and they come back with this and you say, oh my goodness, that's amazing. What an amazing researcher you are. Don't tell them everything because it leaves nothing to the imagination. And it's very important that we take heed of that. Now, we're going to have one final activity. This is the final one before we come back, and I'll share the link with you to the Education Influence. By the way, it's just educationinfluence.com. If you want to find it, you can. Before we do that, we're going to have a little breakout session. I'm going to do this now. So let me just get this ready for you. I'm just going to stop sharing my page. All right. So do you remember earlier on, we talked about the fact that we were looking at essential skills, okay? And this is going to be interesting. So when we become an active listener, active listening is about listening, looking right in the eye, like looking right at them. But you're not going to raise your eyebrows. You're not going to interrupt. You're not going to put your hand up. You're just going to listen until they stop talking. Now, when they finish talking, somebody in your group is going to tell them the story back to them, okay? So you're going to paraphrase it back to them. And that tells them, I've listened to what you've just said. Does it make sense? And we're going to take it in turns to do that. So I'm going to break you into groups of 3. In your group, one person will tell a story about the time when they felt the most afraid. When they finish talking, somebody else will say, okay, let me tell you that back. So what you said was, and they tell the story back. I'll give you my story to start you off. I was in the Himalayas flying from Kathmandu to Pokhara. I was going to go climbing in the Himalayas. I was on the airplane, sitting in my seat. Suddenly, about 5 minutes into the flight on a very small airplane, somebody tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and the lady said, look out of the window. The propeller is not going round. I look out of the window and the propeller, which is flying the plane, has stopped. It's not turning around. It's actually stopped. And the lady behind me said, oh my God, I think we're going to crash. And the pilot said, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, our engines have failed. We're trying to restart them. And she restarted them. 1 minute later, the engine started again and the plane flew and we landed and we were all safe. But for 60 seconds, I thought that was the end of my life and I was going to be dead. I thought I was going to die. So that was the time I felt the most afraid. I'm going to send you into breakout groups right now. And when we do that, I would like one of you in the breakout group to tell a story to the other group about the time you felt most afraid, about 60 seconds, and somebody else is going to tell them back. While they are talking, you can't interrupt, you can't say anything, you can't even nod your head, Yinan. I can see you nodding. You can't nod, you just got to look. And when they finish talking, someone's going to tell them the story back to them. Okay. By the way, Yinan, if I can't get out of this afterwards, please end the breakout group yourself because you're the host. I can't hear you, you're muted.
How long do you need for this activity?
Just 2.5 minutes.
Okay, 2.5 minutes, no problem.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was fun. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Look, I'd just first like to say 2 things. Thank you for coming. It's been a long session. I hope I haven't talked too much and kept you from doing what you love doing. Thank you for those people who said that they've been following me and doing some of the activities at home. It's been amazing, so I really appreciate that. I've also put in the chat 2 things. Number 1, the Education Influence link is in the chat. If you want to join, it would be amazing. And any teachers you have in your schools who want to join that network too, it's completely free. Everything's free. We do training every month, and you can connect with teachers all over the world for free. And the second thing, not wanting to plug it too much, but I wrote a book recently called The Potential in Every Child, and I put a link in the chat. It's actually available in India on Amazon, and it's everything I've just been talking about to you and more. So if you want to grab a copy, you can. Here's a screenshot of it. So there you go.